Hello, and a warm welcome to our show, Love Athletics. In this program, we bring you the latest highlights from our sport with expert input from different continental areas. And we're delighted to have as our guest today US journalist David Monti. Hello, David. Lovely to
Hello,
see
how are
you.
you, Anna?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
So lovely to see you.
Thank you. So before we focus on the athletics news of the last fortnight, including the New York City Marathon, let's start by learning more about our guest. So I always like to know when and how our guests caught the athletics bug. So David, tell us what motivated you to get involved in athletics and start a career as a sports journalist.
It's quite the winding route, to be honest. I was a gymnast in high school and in university, and when I finished with my university time, I had no sport to do because gymnastics is, to be honest, a terrible lifetime sport. And I took up running because I missed the discipline of training. And unfortunately, I didn't have any talent as a runner, but I did enjoy improving and doing the training. And then I got interested in the top athletes who were in the sport. And I started to really follow it closely. And in 1994, I was working for a big bank in New York. And I was frustrated that it was so difficult to follow the sport because you needed to wait for weeks or months even to find out what happened at events. You had to wait for a magazine or some sort of newsletter to come to your home. And I figured out that I could receive results from events by fax, and I could put them in a format, and I could fax them out to a group of subscribers using a computer fax program. And you have to remember there was no internet at the time. So, it was really hard to get data, and it was really hard to send data. And in 1995, the internet came along, email came along. I migrated the service to email, and we started to add editorial material. And I had no formal training as a journalist. I was an English major in school, but frankly, I worked in finance. I had a master's in business administration. And in 1998, Runner's World had launched their website in 1996, and they sent me to cover the Goodwill Games, which you might remember. It was an Olympic-style competition founded by a television network by Ted Turner. And the athletics was held in a place called Mitchell Field on Long Island, which was east of New York City. And they were going to pay me $30 a day to go there. Now, the only way to get there for me and to make it work out financially was I had to ride my bicycle. So I would ride my bicycle out of Manhattan, over the Queensboro Bridge, into Queens, out to Long Island. And the competition didn't end until 11 o'clock at night. And I would ride back in the dark over the bridge. Jane, who was my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, thought I was completely insane. And she worried about me if I'd even make it home. But the next day I would write those stories and I got them in. And it was at that moment that I knew that I was completely committed to this sport, that this is what I wanted to do.
That definitely is insane. Huh? Now tell us, David, what were your three favorite moments in the course of your career?
So you've really, killing me there with trying to determine what the three favorite moments are. But because I worked also as an event organizer, which was something I didn't anticipate, New York Roadrunners, the founder of the New York City Marathon, the Fifth Avenue Mile, and so many other events, they needed a new elite athlete coordinator in the beginning of 2001. They knew me because I lived in the town and I covered their events and was enthusiastic, and they hired me, to do one event. And as a result, I started to get very, very close to athletes. And most of my memory of athletics now, if I think about the last 30 years, has to do with working with athletes on events. So Paula Radcliffe was a huge figure in athletics, but also ended up being a huge figure in my life. I recruited her to run the New York City Marathon several times, including in 2004 after her DNF at the Athens Olympics. I'm sure, Anna, you remember that scene of her sitting on the curb on the side of the road in Athens in the middle of the race, completely shattered. And she came back to New York, rebounded, and won the race. And it was a huge comeback and started, what was a great relationship. And she came back again in 2008 after she had given birth to her daughter, Isla. And at the time, women having children and then coming back quickly to sport was still seen as something that was radical and out there. And Paula was, this incredibly dedicated person. And she just didn't see it as anything more than her just returning to work. And she won the race. The media interest was so hot that like my cell phone was ringing constantly with television networks wanting to interview her. And they dubbed her in the New York press, she was the marathon mom. So I also remember very well in the New York City Marathon in 2005 when Hendrik Ramal and Paul Tergat nearly tied and Tergat won the race. I was standing at the finish line right behind the police barrier watching them run at me. And right behind me, I heard a bunch of shouting and I didn't know what was going on. And I turned around and it was Paul's coach, Dr. Gabriele Rosa, was involved in an altercation with the police because I had told him that he could watch the finish from a certain location, but he didn't pay attention to me and he went in a different place. And the police were holding him back as he was trying to get to the finish line to watch. So I had to turn around, go back, diffuse that situation, pull Dr. Rosa up to where he could see. And at that very moment, the two men came crashing through the finish line, just, tenths of a second apart. And Tergat got the win. I can never forget that. And the other one I'm throwing in a fourth really is that when Shalane Flanagan won New York in 2017, she was the first American woman to win in 40 years. It was a huge moment for our sport. I had spent a long time working with her, getting her ready for the race. And she threw her arms around me and hugged me so tightly, I thought I might break a rib and said, "You have no idea what this means to my family." So that's the sort of thing that stays with you.
Wow. That's fantastic. Thank you, David. So we'll come back later to learn more about our guest, but let's look now at what's been happening in our sport over the last fortnight. So we just spoke about several top protagonists of past New York City marathons, and let's look now at what happened in the 2023 edition. So on the 5th of November, in the women's race, Helen Obiri won in 2 hours 27:23 after a great duel with Ethiopia's Letzel Betride, 2:27:9, while last year's surprise winner, Sharon Lokedi, was third in 2:27:33. Now, Obiri thus took a second win this year after triumphing in Boston, the first woman to achieve this double since Ingrid Christiansen in 1989. And she ran the last 2.195 kilometers in an amazing 6:39, putting her track past on shorter distances to good use. Now, David, it seems Obiri hasn't mastered the distance.
So can you imagine Helen Obiri, the only athlete to win gold medals in World Cross, World Indoors, and World Athletics Championships, already an incredible athlete, has converted herself under coach Dathan Ritzenheim at the On Athletics Club in Boulder, Colorado, to a marathoner. Now, she's only run 3 of them. She's won 2, and the 2 were Boston and New York, and they were in the same year. Who does that? It's just unbelievable. And I thought it was really cool that the year that Ingrid Christensen did it in 1989, that's the year that Helen Obiri was born.
That's a brilliant coincidence. Thank you, David. Let's also hear from Kenyan journalist Celestine Caronet, who has followed Obiri's career for many years. And let's see what she has to say about the newly minted New York City Marathon champion.
Helen Obiri's win in New York capped an incredible first year of marathon running for the Kenyan. She outsprinted Ethiopia's Letesenbet Begide to win in 2 hours, 27 minutes and 23 seconds, the slowest finishing time in 13 years at the competition. The time didn't matter to Obiri. She had triumphed over a strong field to register her second major victory in 3 marathons after winning Boston early in the year, making her the first woman in 34 years to win Boston and New York in the same year. Now, last year, Obiri made her debut in New York, but it was a disappointing 6th place finish, and she later said she had learned the biggest lesson in a marathon running: patience. On the track, Obiri was a front runner, but she discovered in the longer 42-kilometer race, getting the timing of your move right is important, which she did in Boston and New York to win. Obiri's journey into the marathon has been unconventional but worth the sacrifice. Unlike many Kenyans, Obiri decided to make a big change when she made her switch to marathon after a successful track career that spanned a decade, competing in the 1,500 meters first before concentrating in the 5,000 meters and later the 10,000 meters. Obiri's list of accolades includes world titles indoors, outdoors, and in the cross country, along with 2 silver medals in the Olympics. After the 2022 World Championships, she switched to the road and moved to live in Boulder, Colorado in the United States as she worked with her coach, retired American athlete Dathan Ritzenheim. She moved in September 2022, but her family, her daughter, who was 7 at the time, and husband couldn't join her until just before her Boston Marathon in April. Obiri said those long months away from her family were difficult, especially when her daughter would cry and ask her when she is going back home. But looking back, she says the sacrifices were worth it, especially with her family now fully settled in the US. Obiri didn't manage to win any Olympic gold on track, and she hopes she can get a chance to chase an Olympic title in Paris next year, but this time as part of Kenya's marathon team. With the form she's shown in her first year of marathon running, Obiri has definitely put her hand up for selection to the Kenyan marathon team, and it will now be up to the selectors, who are always spoilt for choice.
Thank you, Celestine. Now, the men's race was a much faster affair, with Ethiopia's Tamirat Tola setting a course record of 2 hours 04:58 to triumph by just under 2 minutes over Kenya's Albert Korir, the 2021 winner, who was second with a PB of 2:06:57. And Ethiopia's Shura Kitata was third with 2:07:11. Now, David, what are your key takeaways from the 2023 New York Marathon?
You know, Anna, I love the fact that the major marathons that are in the fall, Berlin, Chicago, New York, and Valencia, are all completely different. And athletes have a clear choice about what kind of marathon they want to do. And New York, in a wonderful way, is a dinosaur. You know, there's no pacemakers. The course is hard. Nobody is trying to make it any faster, right? And the athletes don't understand. And every year, as the lead athlete coordinator, I would try to explain to them how difficult the course is and how you can't just run fast in the beginning and you're going to make a fast time. So many of them fail. So it doesn't surprise me in the least that Tola was the winner, because he's the one with the experience, the one who understands what it's like to run in a race without pacemakers, the guy that has strategy on his mind more than speed. And he used both. You might have noticed in the stats that he ran 14:07 from 25 to 30K. Now that's after climbing all the way up the Queensboro Bridge, to the high point of the course before they go into Manhattan. And that was just death for Jamal Yeamer, who was with him there, and then he just ran away. Interesting footnote: the gap between the men and the women when they entered Central Park at 90th Street, so that's going into the last 3 kilometers, was only 2 minutes and 45 seconds. And the New York Roadrunners thought maybe that the first man would overtake the first woman, and they'd have to stretch 2 tapes at the finish very quickly, one after the other. But as you pointed out, Helen Obiri ran so fast the last 2.195 kilometers, that didn't happen.
That's a really interesting little stat. Thank you, David. Now, I'd also like to mention another athlete who was not among the top finishers, and he didn't achieve the target he had set himself on his debut at the distance. Multiple world 800-meter medalist Adam Schott had declared in mid-September that running the New York City Marathon in 2 hours was his goal, and he seemed well on his way to achieve it until his legs suddenly gave away within sight of the finish line. 2 runners helped him get up twice, and the sextuple European champion eventually crossed the line walking in 2 hours 50:09. Still a very respectable time. So let's now leave New York City and look at the evolution of the marathon over the last 2 years. Especially on the women's side, this has been quite amazing. An incredible 6 of the top 15 all-time marks were achieved in 2023, topped, of course, by the fabulous 2 hours 11:53 world record by Tigist Assefa. 5 of the remaining ones were set in 2022, and only 4 marks before that. This upheaval of the all-time list is really unprecedented in any event. Now, David, super shoes have undoubtedly played a role, but don't you think women believing in themselves and the arrival on the marathon scene of top track runners has had a major impact?
Okay, so there's so much going on here all at the same time, right? So back in the day, the marathon was about running the distance and not about running for time. Paula Radcliffe is the first athlete that really showed that fantastic times were achievable. Now, she ran 2:15 without super shoes. She was also a great track athlete. And then they started to have this trend, and Paula's 2:15 really was the beginning of it, of using male pacemakers, to help women, and then focusing on women for making times. Remember, the women would take a back seat to the men in athletics, for so long, and the marathon was no different. More people started to coach women. More learning came along about how to coach women and how women could be good in the marathon. More women began to believe they could run in the marathon, as you pointed out, and could run fast. Then you layer on top of all of that the introduction of the super shoes. And, there's no doubt in my mind that if Paula Radcliffe had super shoes, she would have run 2:12 or 2:11. I don't see any reason why not. She worked just as hard and was just as talented. But now the adoption of these shoes by athletes, the integration of them into their training, the technique they use to stride and wear the shoes is all having this compounding effect that is pulling the times down to where they are now.
Thanks, David. That's really interesting. Now, let's look at the men. The change there is not as dramatic, but still 3 of the top 15 marks of all time were set this year, and another 4 in 2022. Now, the major development here is the advent of Kelvin Kiptum, who only made his debut at the distance last December and now owns the world record and 3 of the top 6 marks of all time. even undershadowing the great Eliud Kipchoge while still under 24 years of age. Now, David, what do you think of the evolution on the men's side?
So I'm glad that you brought up Kelvin Kiptum, because his case is fascinating. He's so young, and the super shoes were introduced first clandestinely in 2016, and then they came to market, I think, in 2017. Those are the only shoes that he knows. He hasn't done any running really pre-super shoe. So all of his training, all of his development is in the super shoe era. And he's the first athlete, I think, who has used those shoes from the beginning, has seen them as normal, has mastered the technique of using them. And, you know, obviously he's a tremendously talented athlete. He's just the beginning of, I think, what we're going to see in the future, as, you know, people just come up wearing these shoes essentially from the beginning. Now, remember, Kipchoge was key in developing the shoes, right? Nike worked on that project for his benefit, but he was transitioning to them from the regular shoes. Kiptum, not. He's coming to them right from the beginning. And who knows? I mean, he's running Rotterdam next year. I don't see any reason why he can't break 2 hours.
That's crazy, isn't it?
It is.
Now, David, as we conclude our talk about marathon running, can you tell us who are your personal top 3 marathoners of all time, men and women?
So this is going to sound, some of these name selections will sound odd to you, but here goes. Haile Gebrselassie, obviously an incredible track runner who moved to the roads and set, record after record after record. He was really the first athlete to chase times in a consistent way in the marathon. I mean, Tergat came before him with his record at Berlin, but, Haile, sort of modernized that kind of marathon running, which was still, relatively new. He got back-to-back world records in Berlin in 2007 and 2008. He was the first man to break 2:04. The second record held up for 3 years. I think one of the reasons that he's one of my favorites, I mean, I did get to work with him in New York where he DNF'd, but he brought so much attention to the marathon and running for time in the event that really set the stage for the Eliud Kipchoge era that came after that. And before him was Moses Tanui, a guy that won Boston twice, but, he was 7 times a world champion, got 4 world championship silver medals. And he was really the first man who was coached by a European coach, first man from Kenya who was coached by a European coach with a really disciplined approach. And, Dr. Rosa was very interested in seeing how fast he could run. And if you might remember, Moses ran 59:47 at the Stra Milano in 1993. And his marathon record, besides the Boston wins, may not look so great compared to other people. But I was in Chicago in 1999 riding on the lead truck, and he tried to run away from the race after 16 miles. And he was eventually caught by Khalid Kanuchi, who went on to set the world record that day, 2:05:42. It was Tanui who made the race. And when I asked him what he was doing after the race, he told me that he couldn't remember any of the second half of the race, that he was running so hard that he was blacked out on his feet. And, he was the kind of athlete that made that commitment in an event. And, he was memorable for me for that reason. He was a pioneer. And Meb Keflezighi and I are joined at the hip, of course. I recruited him for his marathon debut in New York in 2002, which didn't go well. He wanted to quit the marathon after that race. But he ended up being the only athlete ever to win an Olympic medal in New York and Boston. He won New York at a time in 2009 when nobody thought an American man could win the race. And of course, he won Boston the year after the terrible bombing that was there. And, you know, Meb, to me, will always be one of my favorite marathoners. On the women's side, I mentioned earlier in the program about Paula, not just a great athlete and a game changer, but in every way, but really one of the best people I've ever met in athletics. Like a really, really good person. I'm still very close with her now. Dina Castor, she and I are very close. I recruited her for her marathon debut in 2001 in New York. That was the edition of the New York City Marathon that came after the terrorist attack of 9/11. And we were all really, here in New York, we were all still grieving over what had happened. And the World Trade Center was still smoking. As we went to the start, you could see it from the Verrazzano Bridge, which is on the course. You know, we didn't know what would happen that day. Dina had a great debut, ran a USA debut record. And of course, she went on to run sub 220, the first American woman to do that. And she won both Chicago and London. And she's also, like Paula, really a wonderful person, someone I got close to over the years. And I think that Catherine Dereba doesn't necessarily get her due. An incredibly consistent championship marathoner who had rarely a bad race and maintained an incredible level of humility. And, you know, she had a really long and wonderful career. And I did spend a lot of time with her, and she's really great.
And she's one of the most elegant athletes ever.
Indeed.
Now, David, you mentioned that your choice may seem a little bit not classic, but yes, it is interesting that you don't include Eliud Kipchoge, who still owns 4 of the top 8 all-time marks, and of course, 2 Olympic titles.
So I love Eliud, right? We've had a chance to spend some time together. I've covered him, of course. He's very good friends with Jeffrey Kemwarer and a training partner who won in New York. And I was never successful in getting him to come to New York. And so far, he still hasn't come to New York. You know, of course, you know, he is the greatest of all time. And I recognize that. But it's fun for me to share with you my personal favorites.
No, that's true. Favorites are always personal, and it's interesting to hear why you selected those 6 names. So all the considerations about the marathons could well change on 3 December when Uganda's Joshua Cheptegei makes his marathon debut in Valencia. Now, the world record holder at 5 and 10,000 meters said in an online meeting with media representatives that his goal for the race was to learn the marathon rather than a specific time. So I, for one, will be very curious to see how the Ugandan fares in Valencia. And for the future, the triple world 10,000 meter champion added that he plans to run the 10,000 at the Paris Olympics and is not sure about contesting the marathon. So after concluding our marathon overview, let's move now to another aspect of out-of-stadium events, cross-country. On 11 November, a World Cross Country Tour Gold level event was held in Cardiff. The men's race was held over 9.6 kilometers, and it was a great day for underage athletes. Uganda's 18-year-old Kenneth Kiprop held off a surge by Kenya's Vincent Mutai, prevailing by just 3 seconds, 28:32 to 28:35. And Ethiopia's Abele Bekele Alemo, only 17, was third in 29:06 in his first ever international race. Among the women, on a 6.4 kilometer course, Great Britain's under 23 5,000 champion, under 23 European, of course, Megan Keith, went into the lead from the start and took a comfortable win in 2035 ahead of Ethiopia's Lina Ameba 2052 and Ethiopia's Asmarech Anli 2059, the African under 20 champion at 300,000 meters. A day later, on 12 November in Sevilla, the Cross Internacional de Italica saw a double Kenyan victory on a 9.9 meters course for all athletes, both in a sprint finish, both with the winner clocking the same time as the runner-up. Among the men, Kenya's Ronald Pemoi, who still owns the world under 20 1500 meter record, set back in 2014, prevailed over compatriot Hilary Chepkwony in the final stages of the race, and both were timed in 29:09, while Burundi's Rodrigue Kwizera, the joint winner of the 22-23 World Cross Tour, was third in 29:11, and Kenya's World Under 20 cross champion Ishmael Kipkirui fourth in 29:16. Among the women, after the withdrawal on the eve of the race by favorite Beatrice Chebet due to illness, her compatriot Edina Jibitok, a multi-medalist at continental underage championships, made a break in the early stages, but was caught by Ethiopia's Senayet Getachew, the world under 20 cross champion. In the last lap, the two traded the lead several times, with Jabitok making the final surge in the very last meter to finish just ahead of Senayet, with both athletes clocking 32:39. And Kenya's Winnie Jemutai was a distant third in 33:37. Now, the vast majority of events on the World Cross Country Tour take place in Europe, in fact, in Spain. But the US also has a vibrant cross-country season. Now, David, do you think that the inclusion of the US cross champs in Austin at the end of the month in the World Cross Country Tour is a positive step towards making the circuit a little more global?
I wish I had better news for you on that front, Anna. But no, I don't think it's going to do that. The situation with the cross country in the United States is that it is incredibly popular, intensely popular at the school level, high school and at university. So tomorrow is the NCAA Division I Cross Country Championships. And I'm so sorry that I'm not going this year, but it is the most incredible cross country event that you'll ever see. 512 elite competitors running in two races. Team competition that is so fierce. Live television with full assets deployed, so that you can see everything in the race. Massive crowds running around the course, to watch. Yeah. And after that's over, most American athletes stop running cross country as they move to the pro ranks. Now, a few still do, but most don't. And part of it is the well-developed road running scene here, and part of it is the well-developed indoor scene here, which is also pulling on athletes to do different things. And it's hard to get coaches to get athletes to run cross country if they're running on the road or if they're running in indoors. It would be great if we could expand cross country in the pro ranks here and make it bigger and better. And I'll go to our national championships, in January. And there is a World Cross next year, so people would be looking to qualify. But it's a tough sell to get athletes to go, and it's a tough business proposition to set up these races and make them financially viable.
Whoa, as you said, that's not the best of news. And I also think it's a shame that the cross tour doesn't include an event in Kenya like it used to do years ago.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-mm. All right. So time to leave the cross country now and go back to the global overview of our sport, looking at top marks. Now there's very little stadium activity. So top marks of the fortnight all came from road races. Will include marks over 1,200 points, and that was only achieved last fortnight in the men's marathon, and precisely with Tamirat Tola's time of 2:04:58 in New York. Now, among the under 20 and under 18, there's also very few athletic competitions. So taking place at the moment. So again, these outstanding competition to report for the under 20 was the Ravenna half marathon with two very good times. Winner Tobias Cheruiyot of Kenya won in 1:00:03, which moves him to number 12 on the under 20 all-time list. And runner-up Bute Gemechu of Ethiopia moves to number 6 on the all-time list. So excellent marks for them. Now, there's also another interesting result on the underage women's side. At the VCM number 1 meeting on 9 November in Melbourne, Australia's 12-year-old Sophie Hall ran an exceptional time of 9:22:96 for the 3,000 meters, a mark which ranks her as number 18 on this year's under 18 top list. Quite impressive. And towards the other end of the age spectrum, on 12 November, 54-year-old Vanderlei de Lima completed the Athens marathon in 2 hours 54:29. Now, the Brazilian had famously been pushed off the same course during the 2004 Olympic Games, and where he eventually won bronze. So as we reach the end of the year, it's time to look back at all of 2023. So David, what were your favorite athletics moments of this year?
Well, of course, it's difficult not to look back at Budapest, as the World Championships, which I have to say were staged so beautifully in the new stadium there. The local organizing committee did a wonderful job. And the weather was really good, and the competition on the track was hot. And for me, thinking about that whole meet in the realm of the sport that I work in distance running, that men's 5,000 final, where Mo Katir of Spain and Jakob Ingebrigtsen of Norway battled right to the end, sub 53 for the last lap. And, Katir was just absolutely fearless in trying to win the race. He didn't win the race, but it was the kind of moment in athletics that penetrates through every kind of sports fan, can appreciate that simple action of one man, one athlete running against another and trying to win. And I thought it was just a really compelling race. I also thought that, again, involving Jakob, but Jared Ngus running the American record in the mile at the Prefontaine Classic was really spectacular. And Jared is just a really nice guy. And if you met him and didn't know he was an athlete, he seems so gentle, but he has the heart of a lion. And he ended up in the absolute perfect circumstance where, he got the world's greatest pacemaker to pull him around the track, and allowed him to set that record. And running 3:43 on global television was a big moment for him and for American athletics. The mile, of course, here in the States is really a big deal. So I thought that was great. And I know this isn't a moment, but essentially everything that Faith Kipyegon did in 2023, was so great. And I was really privileged to be able to not only, watch many of those races in person, but also to speak with her right after the race. And her incredible ability as an athlete matched against the level of humility that she has, where, I remember asking her, what all of these world records and medals changed about her. And she looked at me and she said, "I'm still Faith." And that she was unchanged in who she was fundamentally. And that really stuck with me.
Definitely. Mm-mm. Wonderful athlete and wonderful lady. So this is the season when national, continental, and global associations elect their athletes of the year. World Athletics has now announced its finalists for both the Athlete of the Year and the Rising Star Awards. So Athletes of the Year finalists, among the men, Neeraj Chopra in the javelin, world champion and Asian Games gold. Ryan Krauser with a fabulous world record of 23:56 in May, and winning the world championships in 23:51, even though he had issues with blood clots. That was quite amazing. Mondo Duplantis, 2 world records, 6:22 in February and 6:23 at the Diamond League finals in September. Kelvin Kiptum, brilliant world record on 8 October, 2 hours 00:35. And Noah Niles, who won both distances, 100 and 200, at the World Championships. The women's World Athletics Athlete of the Year finalists are Tigist Assefa, this fabulous 2 hours 11:53 world record set in September. Femke Bol with a fabulous season, World Championship gold at the 400 hurdles, and she's getting closer to Sydney McLaughlin's world record. In 2023, she has set the number 3, number 8, 10, and 12 marks of all time. So really a great season on the hurdles for Femke, who also won Euro Indoors gold on the flat. Sharika Jackson, 100 and 200 meters, won gold on the longer distances in Budapest with 21:41. Just 7/100ths of a second from the world record of Flojo, and she was silver in the 100 meters. Faith Kipyegon, what a year. 3 world records in the 1500, the mile, and the 5000, though she later lost that one on the longer distances. World Championship golds on 1500 and 5000. Amazing. And finally, Yulimar Rojas won her 4th World Championship gold. Not the best season for Yulimar, but the consistency of being able to pull out that 4th title was really, really good. And the men's Rising Star finalists, so 3 of them selected by World Athletics. Roshan Clark in the 400-meter hurdles. The Jamaican first equaled, then broke the world under 20 record. Arion Knighton, US sprinter who was a silver medalist in Budapest over 200 and also won 2 Diamond League races. And Kenyan 800-meter runner Emmanuel Wanyonyi, who was also silver at the World Championships, won the Diamond League final and 3 events on the tour, as well as being a world cross-country mixed relay champion. So a great season for Wanyonyi. Among the women's Rising Star finalists, Faith Cherotich of Kenya, World Championships 3,000 meter steeplechase bronze medalist, moved to number 2 on the all-time under 20 lists, and she was also 4th in the world under 20 cross. Medina Asa of Ethiopia has had a great season, both in cross country, where she was silver in the under 20 race, and on the track, 6th in Budapest, and at the World Road Running Championships in Riga, she was also 4th. And finally, Angelina Topic of Serbia, World Championships 7th place in Budapest, twice cleared the 1.97 m, and is the European Under 20 Championship. Now, talking about European athletics, they have already completed the process. European Athletes of the Year are Dutch 400-meter hurdles star Femke Bol, who had a fantastic season, including indoors, as we said, on the flat, and outdoors, where she's closing in on Sydney McLaughlin's stratospheric 400 hurdles world record. The male athlete of the year was Norwegian middle distance star Jakob Ingebrigtsen, who this season set a world record over the 2,000 meters, a world best over the 2 miles, and 3 under 20 records. European rising stars were 2 jumpers, both aged 18, both under 20 European champions. Serbia's Angelina Topic was 7th, as we saw at the World Championships in Budapest, with 1.94 m, and she also performed very well on the Diamond League circuit. And Italy's long jumper Mattia Forlani improved his PB to 8.24 meters, and also boasts a slightly windy 8.44, a jump which is longer than the world under 20 record, but was achieved with a tailwind of plus 2.2 meters per second. So as we await the final decision by World Athletics, so we continue our own poll. So David, tell us, who are your personal athletes of the year?
So on the men's side, by the numbers, it has to be Kelvin Kiptum. If you watch the London Marathon, to run 2:01 there and win by 3 minutes over, an incredible field that was assembled, that's just extraordinary. And then to come back in Chicago and be the first athlete ever to break 2:01 in the marathon. Those 2 performances, are so good. It's just hard to compare. I'm at a loss for words to describe how good they are. But in my heart, Josh Kerr's win in the 1500 in Budapest kind of made him a really special athlete in my mind, especially because he's from a country where middle distance running is so prized and valued, and there's such a great tradition there. And for him to beat Jakob, who was, looked upon as just so dominant and unable to be beaten, I think that also makes him my favorite athlete of the year as well. And on the women's side, what Sifan Hassan accomplished this year is just mind-blowing, isn't it? The fact that she could bookend a track season where she won 2 world championship medals, in 1500, the bronze and the silver in the 5, with a 2:18 marathon at the front end and a 2:13 marathon at the back end, winning both London and Chicago. That's just an incredible kind of range that, as great as Faith Kipyegon is, nobody can match that range. So for me, she's my personal athlete of the year on the women's side.
Thank you, David. That's a really tough call, isn't it? Because, I think, as everybody does, that Faith had a magnificent season. But it's true that Sifan's versatility is totally, totally amazing. So let's look now at your personal rising stars, David.
So I have to tell you that, maybe not until late spring of this year, I didn't even know about Latvia's Agata Sayune. And I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her name right. I had a Latvian journalist tell it to me 3 times in the mix zone in Budapest. So hopefully I'm getting close. But she won the 3,000 and the 5,000 at the Euro under 20s by huge margins. But when she got on the track in Budapest in the prelim of the 5,000, she and her coach decided that she just was not able to sprint with the other way more mature women that were in the race. So they put her on a schedule to run level laps. And I don't know if you remember the race, but she had this huge lead. She was almost leading the race by a full lap. And then, the older women, the more experienced women started to get the pace going in the final kilometer and a half, and they caught up with her and they passed her, but she still managed to finish in the qualifying position to move to the final. And then she chose not to do the final because they didn't think that her body was ready, to be fully recovered from that prelim and go into the final, which I thought took an incredible amount of restraint for the coach and her team. But anyway, she's clearly on my radar now, and I look forward to seeing what she can do in the future, especially because Elena Prokopchuka, who has won the New York City Marathon twice and is a friend of mine, she needs a successor in Latvian running, and it looks like Agata could be it. And on the men's side, the Netherlands' Niels Laros, just showed an incredible amount of star ability for such a young guy. Running 3:31, getting 10th in Budapest, winning the European under 20 1500 meter title. He's really going to be a star in the future. I think he's only 18. That's really something. And in the USA, we have a couple of very, very, very strong young women, but the one who's coming along the most in the last 12 months is Parker Valby, who runs for the University of Florida. She and Caitlin Toohey will be going head-to-head, Caitlin from North Carolina State, in the NCAA Cross Country Championships tomorrow. I really think that those two are going to be the future of 5,000 meter running in the United States, and they've only scratched the surface of their talent.
Thanks so much, David. No, it was really great talking with you, both about what is happening now and reminiscing about great athletes and events of the past.
Thanks.
So let's look now at upcoming events as we reach the end of our show. As you mentioned, tomorrow is the NCAA Cross Championships in Charlottesville. On Sunday, Cross Internacional de Soria, part of the World Cross Country Tour in Spain, and also the Great Ethiopian Run. Not a huge event in terms of times, also because of the altitude, but the participation of people in Ethiopia is always amazing. And also on Sunday, the Asian Marathon Championships in Hong Kong. The following week, the next leg of the cross tour is in Alcobendas, Spain. Also Sunday 26, the Shanghai Marathon. 30 November, as we said, cross champs in Austin, Texas. 3 December, Valencia Marathon. 10 December, European Cross Championships in Brussels. And on 17 December, again, back to the World Cross Country Tour in Venta de Baños in Spain. So we're now at the end of our program. It was really great having David with us on the show.
Thank you, Anna. I really appreciated the opportunity. Wishing you the most joyous holiday season coming up and a very happy new year.
And same to you, David. Thanks so much. And I'll definitely see you around next year around some athletics track.
I'm counting on it.
So thank you, David. Thank you all for watching, and see you next week on Love Athletics to look together at the comments, highlights, and analysis of what's been happening in our sport over the last fortnight. Thank you. Bye-bye.